Hey everyone, you ever hear that riddle, how do you eat an elephant? It's an easy answer, it's a very obvious answer, but for a lot of us who overthink things, the answer is not so obvious. Well, the answer to the riddle, how do you eat an elephant, is one bite at a time. We get so caught up in the minute details in trying to do something that we forget about the big picture. And if you really step back and look at things from a big picture perspective, sometimes the answer to your question is rather obvious. So now let's kind of apply that to jiu-jitsu. Every day there's a new technique that's created. There's also then a counter technique to that new technique, and it just goes on and on and on and on. The question is, will I ever learn everything so that I could be a black belt? Because you look at every world champion black belt and you see, holy smokes, they're doing this and they're doing this and they're doing this now, and they can do this and they've done that, and I haven't even learned one of those things yet, and they're doing 50 different advanced techniques. The answer to the question is, you really cannot learn everything. There is absolutely no way you can learn everything. So let's kind of back up and let me ask you this question. If one black belt is doing the new techniques and he's doing it against other black belts, and the other black belts don't know it, does that make the other black belts no longer black belts because they don't know this technique? No, it's not true. It's not the volume of information that you have that makes you a black belt in jiu-jitsu. There are certain core techniques, certain core positions that you need to know. And depending on your instructor, because like I said, every instructor is different. If your instructor is one of those practitioners who does all those techniques, those new school jiu-jitsu techniques, then in order to be one of his black belts, you're gonna have to know all those techniques. But does that make him and all his students with all those new techniques, does it make him unbeatable versus other black belts? No. You can only be the top of the mountain for a certain period of time until somebody topples you. And that's just human nature. When I was a purple belt, I was resigned to the assumption I was always going to be a purple belt, because that whole time I was a purple belt, there's a period of time, probably about 10 or 11 years, where I didn't train that much. If I was lucky, I'd get in once a month for a period of 10 years. When I decided to commit back to it fully in about 2007, my thought was, man, jiu-jitsu's kind of leaving me behind. I'm not learning, there's all these new stuff that has come into play, and that a black belt today, let's say 2007, is better than a person who earned their black belt in 1997. That was my thought, because of the fact that jiu-jitsu was evolving and the old school was being left behind. I believed the propaganda that the old school was no longer valid, and that jiu-jitsu was no longer jiu-jitsu unless you learned the new things. And really, it just became what we call the hot dot, or the latest fad, however you want to call it. And by doing that, by focusing on what's the latest thing, you end up moving away from other techniques. Sometimes those other techniques are more important than the new one you're learning. Sometimes it's the other way around. The key is to be able to discern which is the most important thing you need to learn. And that can be done mostly with the help of your instructor. Now then the question is your instructor doing all the key important techniques? I don't know. There's so many instructors these days. That's why you have to kind of figure out what their lineage is. That's why lineage is so important. It always has been. Before it was really, one guy who comes down from Carson Sr., another guy who comes down from Hickson, another guy who comes directly from Elio, directly from Carlos Sr., or whatever. That was really the whole argument of it. It didn't mean that one was better than the other, because if you got your black belt from a Gracie, the understanding was that you learned correctly, because all the family members taught correctly. Because presumably they were all trained in how to be a teacher. But in this world now where there's just so many black belts, and a lot of times there are people that are black belts that didn't really earn the black belt, just went ahead and bought the black belt, which I talk about in another video, because of, maybe they're very enterprising people. There's also that old joke about a Brazilian who got on the plane in Brazil, a purple belt, and landed in the U.S. as a black belt. There's a lot of those stories around too. Eventually, because the jiu-jitsu community is so small, although it's getting very large very quickly, because it was so small, it was easy to kind of trace back to who your black belt can be attributed to through your lineage. But because there's so many participants now, you know, when I was participating, you really had a few schools that kind of dominated things. You had Gracie Baja, you had Hoyler Gracie School, Gracie Humaita, you had Carson School, and you had Jacare School, which became Alliance. And in competition, those were really the main ones. But as time has gone on, people leave teams, form their own teams, and with that proliferation of jiu-jitsu, you had a lot more schools of thought come out on how to teach a certain thing. You have some schools that would concentrate on one particular technique and just work it to death, and get really good at it and just do it over and over and over and be able, and their thought was that if they can impose their will and do that technique on everyone, then they can dominate. It works until the counters are figured out. Then you think to yourself, well, you know, okay, so now I need to learn the next thing. You need to learn the counter to what you're doing. The problem is that the counters are so plentiful, and sometimes, and what kind of made me realize is that sometimes the counter is actually further back in a basic technique, not in the next level of advanced, so-called advanced techniques. It's kind of weird, and I wrote a piece about this a few years ago called "Coming Full Circle in Jiu-Jitsu," and really what that meant was I was kind of bought into this whole thing about having to learn all the next best thing, and then I realized that I really needed to go back to my roots and come full circle and learn what I had walked away from for a period of time. And then I realized that I had found what I was looking for, and the whole thing about jiu-jitsu's universe of techniques being so large and just growing by leaps and bounds, all of a sudden everything came back into focus for me. Then I knew what I needed to learn in more broad terms and not so much in minute details, because there are some concepts that are universally important, no matter how new the technique is. There are some things like base. If you have good base, I don't care what. You can be coming up against some guy who's got the greatest guard play, but if your base is undeniably solid and it's immovable, there's no way that particular individual will be able to even get started with this particular guard game. He's got the latest guard game if your base is so immovable. And base is really an old concept. I mean, that goes back to judo days. I mean, you look at judo guys. Judo guys have tremendous base. You know, that's why a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, when they come up in a tournament against a judo guy, they just get flung all over the place because they have no base relative to the judo practitioner. On the other hand, when a jiu-jitsu guy tries to stand up and throw with a judo guy, tries to throw judo style against a judo guy, he can't get anything because he does not understand the concept of base. He does not know how that base is created, and since he doesn't know how the base is created, he doesn't know how to break the base. There's a couple of videos that you find, and it's not a common thing, but you see it, where the person with no base gets exposed for the fact that he has no base. And excuse me, I just saw some jiu-jitsu guy, some BJJ guy, go up against a wrestler. No matter what, this jiu-jitsu guy, he kept sitting on his butt, trying to do the old butt scoot game and try to get the wrestler to kind of buy into it and go down to his knees. But no, the wrestler just stayed on his feet, looking at him like, "What are you doing? You know, if you want to pursue to the next step, you're going to need to take me down." Well, he probably tried 3 or 4 times with these weak takedown attempts, weak versus a wrestler, of course, and the wrestler just stood there and just shook him off every time. And then there's this one time when the BJJ guy went and engaged the wrestler. Wrestler picked him up, slammed him, and the jiu-jitsu guy was almost unconscious, kind of got back up staggering. The referee kind of like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm good." And went up again, and he just got smashed again, and then that was the end of the match. So all those new techniques that he had on the ground, that he spent all this time learning, while forgetting about an important concept such as base, was all for nothing. He spent all those years learning how to do all this cool stuff. It didn't even matter because he was putting the cart before the horse, as they say. He didn't worry about his horse, he worried about his cart more. And as a result, since he had no base, he had no understanding of base, he had no ability to disrupt this guy's base, and therefore just got demolished. And this happens a lot. So really, sometimes this particular BJJ guy would have spent his time a lot better just worrying about the one detail called base. So he tried to take too large a bite in what he was learning, and he ended up getting choked. When trying to learn something, don't look ahead and go, wow, look at all that. And that's one of the primary reasons that people fail when they buy DVDs. You might buy a set of DVDs. This guy, really good world champion black belt might have a 10 DVD set going over his entire game. So what do people do? They look at that elephant, those 10 DVDs, and go, wow, look at all this. How am I possibly going to do this? And then they start watching DVD 1. And then they don't just stop on lesson 1. They continue watching, leave the TV on, and watch lesson 2, 3, 4, 5. They end up staying up all night watching just DVD after DVD after DVD. And then they realize, holy smokes, how am I going to learn all this? And then they get overwhelmed, because when they're trying to learn something in lesson 1, they're thinking about something they saw in lesson 10 that was pretty cool. Let me go work on that. Work on that for a few seconds. They realize, oh, I just saw something on DVD 4. Let me look at that. So they're always chasing that hot dot. Having the encyclopedia in front of you really did you a disservice, because that particular person wasn't disciplined enough to start with lesson 1 in DVD 1 and work through there, get to lesson 2, get it all under command, go to lesson 3, get it all under command. They were so excited that they went ahead and looked at the whole DVD and just screwed themselves up. That's the person who dropped the elephant, looked at the elephant, and go, how am I going to eat this whole elephant? And he had no clue, right? He didn't know the answer was so obvious. You eat it one bite at a time. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.